get what you deserve. I'm your nightmare while you're fast asleep.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of Quarantine Here. Just don't care. I'm just kidding. Oh, it really is amazing what you can get your hair to do after not getting it cut for way too long. Today, the real stuff, talking about Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews. Now, if you have never heard of this book, I guess I can forgive you, because it is 40 years old. However, it has 2 TV movies, and one is from Lifetime. I mean, yeah, it's like 6 years old, but still, like, where have you been if you have never been exposed to Lifetime movies? The book, after reading it, I feel like the only reason it has any sort of longevity is because of the content, not because it was well done, not because of any kind of content inside of it, but because the plot revolves around taboo subjects in society. Which I hate to say, but we like what we're not supposed to have. That's just human nature. We want to know, we want to have what we aren't supposed to know or have. I came across this book because it was, I think, published in the late 70s and then had a TV movie in the 80s. And so I probably saw or was exposed to the first movie when I was 10, 12-ish, 14-ish. So it has stuck with me for 20 years? Yes, I've just revealed my age if you're any good with math. And that probably is a reflection on how demented I am, that I have wanted to read a book that revolves around this kind of content. The problem is, so Andrews died in the 80s, and so there have been a number of sequels, which I think she wrote maybe 1 or 2 of them. But so since then, it has been done by a ghostwriter. However, I can get some of those sequels on audiobook, because as I said, that's how I get through a lot of my reading these days. This book, for some reason, which I just do not understand, why do you have sequels of books on audiobook, but not the actual book? I mean, it's like not being able to read Harry Potter, but being expected to understand the rest of the series. I just don't get it. Anyways, so with quarantine, once the libraries started doing their curbside pickup, I decided to just go through my TBR list and say, what has been on here a really long time, or what has been on here that I've really wanted to read, but haven't had the time to read, and this was top of the list. Sorry, it's mirrors, so I'm like, I think I'm turning it the right way, and I'm not. I guess it took me 2 weeks to read this, and you know, you see it's kind of a thick book, but it's not thick enough, because my Wendy Darling books are just slightly smaller than these, and I got them like that. The problem is the writing. Forget the fact that it was written 40 years ago, and they had different rules for what they were allowed to do and not do. She missed out on so much development, both with character and plot, and I just felt like this huge emotional disconnect when it should have been the exact opposite. For those of you who don't know about this book, it is essentially about incest, child abuse, and 4 children getting locked in an attic for a number of years. Doesn't that sound like a really good book to you? I mean, all the disturbingness aside, like, there are so many elements that you would think would make for a really great book that are completely lacking. And that is because there's no emotional connectivity. The basic premise, as I said, is 4 children get locked in an attic. Their parents were related. He was the mother's half uncle, which after they got married caused her parents to disown her. However, he dies, and they're basically left in debt because they just are. So she's like, the only place I have left to go is my parents, because the book is set in the 60s. So she really has no marketable skills. She was raised to be a debutante, to marry rich, and just to take care of a household. So anyways, he dies. She can't support the family. She realizes she really has only one option left, but as I've already said, she's been disowned. So she realizes she needs to get back in her father's good graces. Part of the problem is they're extremely religious, which coming from a religious family, I can see how this would be problematic, that if my sister married a half-uncle, my parents would be like, what are you doing? I don't think they would disinherit my sister, but they're like fanatical religious, and therein lies the problem. So the mother is like, okay, now I gotta get back in his good graces, so I'm gonna reach out to my mother, who thinks they are the spawn of Satan, and convince her to let us come back, and we will hide the children in the attic until I can get back in the will. So she says it's gonna be one day. And then she's like, it's going to be a couple days. And then it's going to be a couple weeks. And then, oh, my father's on his deathbed. And blah, 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 blah. Turns into 4 years. And these children are not allowed to leave. So they imagine. I mean, you can't imagine. It's quarantine. Imagine. But even then, you can go out to the grocery store. You can walk outside. They're not allowed to do that. It chronicles, I guess, their development, their emotional, their physical, whatever development, as they're stuck in this attic under the tyranny of their fanatically religious grandmother, their increasingly distant mother, and then how do they get out? Oh God, I just don't know where to start. Because I was so disappointed. Even watching the movies, I felt like something was missing, but I just thought it was because it was a movie. Because we all know that movies are never as good as the book. But as I said, I will read or reread series with hopes that maybe something has changed. And so that was kind of my thought, was that, you know, I wasn't super impressed by the movies, but there were definitely elements that I was like, this is crazy, this is nutballs, I want to see how it was done in the book, so I'm going to read the book. I mean, please tell me if you agree. I felt like Andrews exchanged good plot and good characterization for flowery language and excessiveness. I mean, just starting in the beginning, she takes 2, 3, 4 chapters of backstory, which any good writer knows you don't do. And now I know why. I mean, I've seen it in other books, but this is a prime example of how I think it would have been better suited to start with the children already in the attic. And then flashback, somehow feed us this background information rather than giving all of it to us when, I mean, I think I read a couple of the first pages. And then I said, where's my story? When are we going to get started? And so then I would read a couple pages of the second chapter. And then I flipped through until they actually got to their grandmother's house. So and then she would kind of repeat scenes, which I can understand. Because, for instance, if my mother took me somewhere and locked me away with the promise of freedom, every time she came back and reneged on that promise, I would bring it up. I would bring up that same argument, and assuredly she would apologize. So I could understand why we saw that over and over and over. I think the issue I took with it is that there was no growth. We saw the mother changing and withdrawing from her children, but we never knew why. You can assume it's because she's an innately selfish person, and when she ran away from her family, she did not realize, like her parents, when she was younger and she got married and she ran away from them, she did not realize what she had until she didn't have it. And so she learned to adapt because she was in love, you know? But then once she did not have this person who she gave it all up for and who she had convinced herself she couldn't live without, and then she came back to the opulence that she'd forgotten about, but then remembered how nice it was, I mean, I can understand why she would dive into selfishness. And, you know, we learn, spoiler alert, that the grandfather had put a clause in his will that if she had ever had children with her first husband, because she gets remarried, she would be kicked out of the will again. And then, because he is sadistic, he says she can't have children with any other subsequent husbands. I mean, it's just like, again, there are so many things that could make this book great, because all the characters have potential for greatness, and we just don't get it. We just don't get it. When I kept trying to find a character that I could relate to, or not even just relate to, but like latch onto, to like, to root for. And I kind of latched onto the grandmother the most because I felt like she had the most dimension. Even though she was a really flat character as well. There was no growth, no character arc with her. She comes in a horrible witch of a woman, and she ends a horrible witch of a woman. We get bits and pieces as to how she could be a sympathetic character, how we can feel sorry for her, but outside of that, she never changes. Like, there's nothing. I liked her because she was so bad. And it was so much better than a weak mother who, again, she changed, but there's really no character arc. She just changed, and we didn't know why. I mean, except we could guess. I mean, yes, there was just no explanation, which I guess later novels try to explain, but then there are differences, there are inaccuracies. So it's like, I don't know what to believe. But anyways, we're not talking about those books. We're talking about Flowers in the Attic. And then, so there are 4, I'm going to call them doppelganger children. They're not doppelgangers, they're Dollengangers, Dollingers, but I like the name doppelganger because I can pronounce it. I mean, I know that's a terrible reason, but anyways, so there are 4 children. Chris, Kathy, Corey, and Carrie. Corey and Carrie are twins, and then there's like 2-ish years between Chris and Kathy. And they enter the attic. Chris and Kathy, like Chris is 14 and Kathy's 12. So they're on the verge of adolescence. So naturally, spending 3 or 4 years, they will have physical growth, but there was no emotional growth, I felt like. Chris started out as a 14-year-old. Granted, it's in like the 50s or 60s, so maybe drive and knowing your career path early was something that they did, which we don't. But as a 14-year-old, he already knew he was going to be a doctor. And as a 12-year-old, she was already this amazing ballet dancer, and that's all she wanted to do. And then the twins were 4. So they were just, you know, nasty little beasts who didn't want to be trapped in a room for, you know, years on end. So it's like the twins continued to be nasty little beasts who wouldn't eat their peas. Kathy remained this idealistic dreamer who somehow, okay, please explain to me. I mean, except that the mother brought them basically whatever they wanted. And so maybe she supplied them these tools. Explain to me how Chris, as a 14-year-old, can install a proper ballet bar in the attic. And then explain to me how Kathy, as a 12-year-old, is able to not only maintain her dance ability, but improve her dance ability. Because, side note here, I have taken care of a little girl from infancy, and she's 10 now. And so, basically, since the age of 2, she has danced. But if you put her in an attic, she's not going to become a prima ballerina by the time she's out. Like, there are only so many skills that she could have learned. There's a whole lot more that she's not getting because she doesn't know about it. So I just don't understand how Kathy was able to improve her dance ability so much. Or even, like, she has no mirrors, so she can't watch herself. She can't watch her form or her technique. But you get this sense that she is just this beautiful dancer. And Chris, he, as I said, he, from a very early age, knew he wanted to be a doctor. So granted, they have access to tomes of, like, really, really old books. I mean, this house, it's massive, all right? And it's apparently really old, like Civil War era old. So they have access to, and I guess their family is just pack rabbits, and everything they've ever owned goes up in the attic. So they have access to whatever the family has ever owned, but doesn't want to keep downstairs anymore. So sure, he could have read those books, but they're outdated, just like this book. It's outdated. So you're not going to learn techniques. And you're in modern, for this, you're not going to learn how to write by reading this book. Just like he's not going to learn modern medicine from outdated books. I mean, maybe, as I said, the mother supplied him with things. So he maintained this air of maturity. Like, he was, in my opinion, far too mature for a 14-year-old when they entered this attic. And he maintained that level of maturity. Kathy maintained her level of immaturity. She was the passionate one, where he was the level-headed one. He knew how to do everything. He had an answer for everything. All right, I grew up with an older sister. I grew up with a younger sister. I grew up with a younger brother. We all thought we knew everything. And particularly with older siblings, you believe that their answers are true. Like, they are infallible. But they're usually not. I mean, it's so funny because sometimes I'll say something to my older sister about something that happened years and years and years and years ago when we were children, and she's like, oh yeah, I just made that up. Like, I was probably just trying to get you out of my hair. So, I mean, the thing is here, they're not changing. But, as I said, their bodies are changing, and, adolescence is coming, and they are noticing themselves. I don't know about you, but I was not fascinated by development, either mine or the opposite sex. I was more horrified by it. It's just part of life. I just went with it. So Kathy is obsessed with her new body. And Christopher seems to be obsessed with his new body as well. And I just don't understand this part, where they begin developing feelings towards each other. I don't know if there's an agenda here. I don't know if Andrews is trying to push the fact that she thinks it's okay and that we should too, because she does say, because when their mother Corinne, it finally explains the true nature of her relationship with Christopher Sr., she emphasizes how there was nothing wrong with what they did because they were in love. And it's only society that tells you you should not have relations with close family members. So I don't know if that's Andrews trying to push this agenda or if it's merely part of the plot. The idea that we shouldn't, and so she's going to weave in the idea of it's not wrong. I struggled with their burgeoning feelings towards each other because I didn't know if, again, it was Andrews just trying to keep the plot going, if it was her trying to tell us, like, society is wrong, or if it's really the fact that if you have never been exposed to anybody else of the opposite sex, and you have been forced into a parental role, into a role of requiring a maturity that most children your age don't, and so you're pushed out of family. Like, he is no longer your brother. He is your support system. If that is why they were able to forget the fact that they were related, the grandmother at the very beginning of the novel had left them this long list of don'ts. And it's basically, ice yourself, stay fully clothed, boys are with boys, girls are with girls. So they both knew it was wrong. And they always recognized that they were siblings. But is it when you are pushed into a different sort of role with your sibling, you can start viewing them in a different way? Like, it makes me want to vomit thinking about my brother like that. I don't know about you, but like, how, ew. We're just gonna leave it there. Ew. There are just so many things I could talk about with this book that I did not understand, that I felt were confusing. I will spoil it, and I mean, it's not much of a spoiler if you've seen the movie. You know, Kathy and Chris do end up having sex, which there is, for me, some confusion, some wondering, because Andrews does term it as rape, because at some point Corinne does remarry. And Kathy, she and Chris had been able to make a copy of the key and had been getting out and stealing money in preparation for their inevitable escape. So Kathy goes to her parents' room and discovers, hey, like, the stepfather's actually still there. He's asleep, but he's there. And for whatever her reasons really are, she goes and she kisses him, and he thinks it's all a dream, and then Chris overhears him telling their mother about this dream, and it upsets him. So because he, as I said, they are developing feelings towards each other, and he approaches Kathy, and he accuses her more under the guise of, you could have ruined it for us if they found out that we were getting out of the room. But it leads to a scuffle and a compromising position, and then them having sex. In the aftermath, he does say, "I'm sorry for raping you." To which she says, "You didn't rape me." So my question is, and I guess this really goes towards how you define rape. During the act, or in lead up to the act, or actually both, you know, she's thinking, this is something I want too. If only he'd gone about it a different way, it wouldn't have had to have gone this way. Because she never says no. I think to me, I perceived her struggle as merely fighting against somebody who has a bad temper, not because she's afraid for her life, not because she wants him to stop him from doing what he's doing. And so, it's kind of things like that. They're sort of ambiguous as to why they're happening, what's the reason for why they're happening. Funnily enough, usually a book, the most exciting parts are the beginning and the end, and then the middle is where you're like, meh. I kind of liked the middle the most, because the beginning, it was so heavy with backstory and unnecessary scenes, and then the end, I just felt like it dragged on. As I said, there are 4 kids, and Corey and Carrie are the twins. Well, at some point, Kathy is admiring her naked body, and she catches Chris admiring her naked body, and then she allows him to admire her naked body, and wouldn't you know it, their grandmother catches them. And so she threatens. She says, all right, you either cut off all your hair, because now it's all about vanity, or you don't eat. And so, obviously, Kathy, because that's her prized possession, she refuses to cut off her hair, and they end up near starvation. This is all really confusing. It feels kind of like a dreamlike state, but I guess it's actually reality. The mother and the grandmother, they come in and they drug Kathy. They pour tar over her head, which, please explain to me, if she is sharing a bed with somebody, how that other person sleeps through the whole thing. Or even how her brothers, who are like 10 feet away in another bed, sleep through the whole thing. Anyways, she wakes up and she's like, oh, my hair. Whatever ensues. But they start receiving food again. And in the basket, they get something new, which are powdered donuts. Turns out the donuts are laced with rat poison. and Corey dies. You'd think there would be this big to-do about Corey's death, and there's really not. Because I knew it was coming, because I knew the premise of the book. I'd seen-ish the movies, so I knew it was coming, and I was like, oh, what kind of lead-up am I going to have? Nothing. I mean, only because in my head, I knew he was going to die from these, and I'm like, don't eat the donuts! But really, there's nothing ominous whatsoever. They really don't even, or Andrews doesn't even really make a big deal out of these donuts, except at first, where they're like, oh, donuts, like, that's awesome, we're not allowed to have donuts, so super. Like, I guess our grandmother, who has no character arc, no character growth, she has changed her mind about us. And she's sorry for nearly starving us. So yeah, it's just stuff like that, where the things you'd expect to really be emphasized, they're not. But what is emphasized is something that is emphasized over and over and over. And that's not even talking about theme. Sure, of course, we can re-emphasize our theme, but this is not something, but this stuff she emphasizes is not thematic. In the end, we learn, or at least we can assume from information that Chris has gleaned, that it was actually the mother who was poisoning them because of the clause that the grandfather had put in his will. In later books, it's explained away as her attempt to get them out of the house, because if they're sick, then she can take them to the hospital. However, she took Corey to the hospital, and she says he died there from pneumonia, and that they buried him somewhere. But then Chris is like, in the end, after all this information is revealed, he's like, that never happened. But we don't really know. Like, we don't really know. It's just, there is just so much left undone. And it's not a thin book. She had a lot of time to really explore elements, and she just didn't. And so Simon and Schuster, whoever Andrew's editor was, and agent, like, please, call me, email me, tell me, what did you see in this book? Except for incest and being locked in an attic. Because really, those are the only two things that would make someone pick this up. Yeah. When this is over, I'm going to go and delete, I think I may have already said this, I don't know. I'm going to delete all the audiobooks that I downloaded because I have no interest. Like, Wikipedia the plots, the summaries, and read that. And you know what? That might be more interesting than reading the actual book, because you don't have to go through all the junk in between. I mean, for me just to say, mother married her uncle, had 4 kids, brought them back to her parents' house, neglected them, and locked them in an attic. And then the brother and the sister have sex. That's as exciting as you're going to get. So please, don't read it. If you want to bore yourself out of your mind, go for it. I mean, as I said, it took me like 2 weeks to read it, and I skipped chapters. Well, not whole chapters, but I would skip 2 or 3 pages at a time. And it took me 2 weeks, because it was just that boring. Can't wait to take it back to the library. It was a waste of time. I feel like this review is kind of all over the place, but sometimes that's just where my brain leads me. Tell me what you thought. And, if it's bad, it's bad. If it's good, that's great. I'll see you next time for Quarantine Hair. Just don't care.